Mario Kart Super Circuit. I mean, what is there really to say about this entry at this point? I feel like you're either on one side of the spectrum or the other, where you either love this game to death because you probably grew up with it and have an infinite bias towards it, or you really dislike this game because of its art style and similar control scheme to Super Mario Kart, which, let's be honest, is just absolutely terrible. Today, I'm here to find out if the slander is true and worth it by ranking these tracks from worst to best with a tier list at the very end. So how this works: F tier, absolute garbage, just terrible, I don't want to play it. D tier is bad, but it has a saving grace that keeps it out of the F tier, but it's not even mediocre, it's just bad. C tier is completely mediocre. I don't enjoy it, but I don't dislike it at all. It's just gonna whatever, I'm never gonna really go out of my way to pick it. B tier, sure, sometimes I'll go out of my way to pick it, it's solid. A tier is pretty good, I'll go out of my way to pick it fairly often. And S tier is the best of the best. I'll pick you 9 times out of 10. Alright, after the absolute high that was this absolutely stacked Lightning Cup, I ran into a problem. Snowland, the first F tier. What is this? First off, my screen was shaking like crazy throughout the entire track. I thought I was having a migraine. It was just that the game was spazzing out for some reason, and I don't know why. The ice is slippy, sure, but 90% of the track is just straight line with a slight turn and then into a straight line with a slight curve. There might be a few shortcuts that are kind of neat here and there, but the hazards are lame, and I ran into them on purpose, by the way, and they didn't even make me spin out. What is the point of your hazard, which is not even like in the middle of the track except for one small section, and they're easily avoidable, by the way, if I'm not even going to spin out? I didn't even come. Whoa, why is this on the script? Oh. I didn't even come first this time, and it wasn't even because the track was hard, it was because I personally had a complete skill issue, alright? If you saw my SNES ranking, I yapped a lot about how I hated Ghost Valley 2. And while nothing can overcome my vendetta for that track, this track comes damn close. I mean, seriously, for a second there, I thought Super Circuit was a gift given from the gods, and then boom, out comes Snowland to ruin everything. The 8th Deluxe rendition really saved this track, and this was just terrible. Easiest F tier ever. That was disgusting.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Starting off the D tier is Peach Circuit. I mean, listen, it's not a terrible track to start the game with, but that's its really exact issue, is that you're starting the game here. Like, it's very forgettable as a track. It has no hazards. It's an easy to understand layout, and it does a good job at preparing you for the controls of Super Circuit. And yeah, overall it's fine. It doesn't do too much wrong, and it doesn't really do anything to stick out, but the real issue is that it's just a starting track. And listen, I'm not a starting track hater, but historically, starting tracks in Mario Kart games just aren't that good because they're intentionally boring. They're getting the player used to the control scheme of the game, used to how the game works. You know, it's fair, but that doesn't make it any better than it already is. So D tier seems very fitting for Peach's Circuit. The next D tier is Bowser's Castle 1. I was really fighting for this to get into C tier because it's a Bowser's Castle track, right? Those are some of my favorite tracks I have complete bias towards, but the track is just so short, and it feels like once you get into this track, the second lap begins and it's already about to be over, right? and then you gotta do it again anyway, and it just kind of gets boring after the second time around. Like, it's a short track, but somehow it feels like I've been driving on this thing forever, and it's just too easy. And like I said before, same thing with Peach Circuit. It's like in the first cup, so it's going to be respectably easier, but at the same time it's the last cup, or it's the last track in the first cup, and typically the last track in the first cup is just a banger. Like Luigi's Mansion was very good, and Thwomp Ruins I still have as a great track, right? Those are tracks that are still fairly difficult because you've started to get eased in, and now you can get your final challenge that isn't way too hard. So I feel like it's not really challenging enough. It's got a cool atmosphere and setting and stuff, but it's something we've definitely seen before. So for that reason alone, I think it deserves a D tier.
What?
No, I know that sounds bad.
Mario Circuit is headed for C tier. This one was almost a B, but after thinking about it, I just couldn't give it a B. The track is fairly boring, but the real saving grace is the sharp U-turns that you have to commonly face. It really gets you used to the drifting mechanics and helped me understand this game a little bit better. Still though, it is boring as a circuit track, and it has no hazards at all. The shortcut at the end, or I guess next to the beginning more so, it feels more like a long cut than anything. I feel like I'm really going through a patch of grass to get to this cut, and I'm not really cutting much off-road, maybe like a sliver, and I'm pretty sure you just go faster if you stick to the left anyway, so it's really not worth it at all, but it's fine. It's a dull atmosphere. It's just a circuit track. It's C. Riverside Park is also in the C tier. Alright, the jungle setting is really cool, but there's some issues here. Like, there are no real hazards, and the shortcut opportunities are interesting, but I find myself not really going for them most of the time. There are some opportunities to just kind of mess yourself up within the track, but I still feel like it's fairly easy. I think this was the second cup in the game. It's okay, right? The real saving grace here that doesn't let it go fall to D tier is just the jungle setting. It's something that had not been done yet, and it's something, unless you consider DK Jungle Parkway, but do we really? I mean, there's also the idea that these Mario Kart 64 and Super Circuit could have been developed at the same time, so like, no, are we really gonna... I don't know. I'm just gonna say that it's an original concept for now. Should I do research on it? Yes. Will I be doing research on it? Not at all. Next track. Shy Guy Beach falls into the C tier. You know, it's got good atmosphere, and it was definitely a lot more forgettable and similar to Koopa Beaches, but it has some fun hazards with the crabs, and it was fun to play, and still fairly easy. I mean, I'd say overall, by the way, I literally just read off my notes, like word for word, bar for bar, but I'd say overall it was a pretty fun track with a cool aesthetic, but it just, I did realize actually after I wrote the script, because I did play these tracks twice just to get my thoughts, you know, nailed in, I did realize that there were some cannons as hazards. I actually don't know if that was just for the aesthetic, because there are some like pirate ships with Shy Guys in them on the background. I don't know if that was just the aesthetics, or like it was just for the atmosphere, if it was actually coming down, because it seemed like it never hit me, no matter what. So I don't know if it was a genuine hazard or not, so I'm not gonna count it. But it was still pretty cool, and it saves it from being D tier. The layout is still simple, and it's literally just like, I think it was like literally just like Koopa Beach 2 on the SNES, which, whatever, I mean, it's still a pretty good track.
Here's
I'm sure you can. I'm sure.
Starting off the B tier is Broken Pier. You know, I think Broken Pier is a solid track. I was really debating between C tier and B tier, but B just felt more appropriate for being in the Special Cup. First off, it's not very special, alright? Let's get that out of the way. It's literally just Boo Lake with some somewhat harder turns, and really, the layout is cool, I'll give it that, but I feel like I've seen it before, it's been done before, and to be in the last cup of the game and feel like this, it's not hitting for me, it's just not. Still though, the atmosphere is pretty cool, and it is fairly difficult track, being the only one I actually didn't get top 4 on. Can we talk about this glowing bridge shortcut? Because I feel like every single time I go for this shortcut, it just disappears. Like, are we serious? Maybe it's because I was in first, but nonetheless, this track is pretty solid. For being in the last cup, it is a little disappointing, but I still think it's a B tier. It's fairly solid overall. Next up on the B tier is Bowser's Castle 2. Now, Bowser's Castle 2, this was just beyond a step up from the first one. Let's get that cleared up. I mean, the holes in the floor made it difficult to maneuver around, similar to Boo Lake, and I found myself falling into these pits fairly often. The difficulty is fitting for the Flower Cup, although I do have some gripes holding it back from A tier. 2 in particular. First off, the 90-degree turns here, they just don't work how you'd expect. They feel janky, at times they just don't work. It's just a little bit annoying, and it's something that I talked about a little bit with Choco Island 2 in my SNES ranking, where sometimes you try and fit the control scheme for certain tracks, and you could definitely tell when it does not work. Here, I don't think it works too well. So, you know, typically I just bounce into the other direction, right? Secondly, it lacks hazards, and it's very apparent that it lacks hazards. The thwomps are there, but they don't really challenge you in any way. They're very easy to maneuver around. There's no risk reward for going underneath them. If you do go underneath them, there's no real reason why. I guess it might be a split second faster to go underneath. There's no real reason to go underneath them though, and you know, it's whatever. But I do love how, you know, they match the beat when the thwomps are going down. They match the rhythm that the instrumental is playing towards. They aren't ever in the way though, if we're just being honest. But overall, I did enjoy this track. It was fairly solid. B tier seems fair. Yoshi Desert is pretty cool. It takes place in a, I don't really know how to describe this without somebody getting actually stunned, so here goes. It takes place in a desert! Man, what's new with Mario Kart? This desert is genuinely interesting though, as the background has a Yoshi Sphinx surrounded by pyramids, which is surely an interesting setting. The hazards in this track are really just non-existent, but there are some piranha plants hiding in quicksand ready to chew you up and spit you out. The problem here though is that most of them are in the off-road, and you know, this would be completely fine. It wouldn't even be a problem if, you know, the actual road itself that you're driving on wasn't huge. So it's not often I see myself landing in the off-road to get eaten by these piranha plants. Other than that, the game does make you play a game of Would You Rather from time to time, where you get to choose between speed boosts and the little jump pads that they have, or item boxes. If you choose between these, you know, you could take the speed, but you don't have an item, so you don't have protection or anything until the next set, or you could take the item boxes, but there's a chance that other racers could pull in front of you. But then again, there's also a chance that that item box, depending on your placement, can get rid of those racers. So I feel like that's definitely an interesting concept. The layout is kind of boring and the track is fairly short. I feel like B tier is very fitting because it does have some flaws, but it's still overall a good track with unique concepts.
It would be so awesome. It would be so cool.
So here we are, Bowser's Castle 3. You know, unlike the other two, This one takes place in a thundering night with a purple aesthetic here, and the surrounding walls. This one is very similar to Bowser's Castle 2, but it feels kind of longer. The thwomps are more in your way and provide more of a risk-reward aspect, because some of them are hiding item boxes underneath them. You see, one of my main issues with the first Bowser's Castle was just that there was no real reason to even run into the thwomps. They were pretty widely separated, they were easy to dodge and avoid, and there was no real reason to go underneath them. But now, you could risk it because there's an item box underneath. So do you risk going for the item box and getting stopped by a thwomp or stomped on by a thwomp and like probably losing placements? Or do you risk it and just take the item box, right? And just hope that, you know, you time it right. So that is a pretty interesting concept right there, I'll admit. Overall, it's pretty good, but it doesn't really stand out too much other than that, right? It still is a lot like Bowser's Castle 1 in that aspect. But I feel like A tier is fair because that was just one of the only things Bowser's Castle 1 was missing. And it is a little bit longer, which is another critique I had. So yeah, I feel like it's pretty fair A tier. This one, I would say, was pretty surprising, making the A tier, is Luigi's Circuit. So far, it's just the best circuit track in the game, right? There's finally advertisements here. Like, I'm gonna completely disrespect Mario, but Mario Circuit felt so secluded in the woods for some reason. Like, it's almost as if Mario just saw a jungle and he was like, yeah, this is a perfect spot for me to throw my racetrack in with no advertising or even fan attendance. Like, it was just so empty. And Peach Circuit was similar, but the castle in the background, it made it feel like slightly more private. Like, it's like, okay, well, this is Peach's home, so maybe she doesn't want to give her address to these strangers. That's why there's nobody here and it's not advertised. So, you know, the background was a little bit more understandable. But anyways, we have to get to Luigi here, right? The track is overall better than the other two circuits by a mile. The layout is perfect, and the track feels like it's just got a perfect face, right? It just feels good to play on, right? I didn't even notice that I was on my second lap. I was having so much fun, I was like, oh wow, I'm on my second lap already, right? The puzzles work as hazards a little too well, let's be honest. And there's this mud texture right here. I'll put it on screen. It's really speaking to me, man. I like how grainy it is. Now listen, I'm not ranking off of mud textures, but if I was, one of these tracks would be going in the S tier, alright? But yeah, A tier seems fair to me. After the absolutely disgusting thing that was Snowland.
In other news, local resident SpongeBob SquarePants only has a few hours left to complete his essay, and yet he continues to goof off. When will he learn?
Just terrible, leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Ribbon Road bounces back and removes that sour taste from my mouth. The layout is solid here and the length of the track is pretty nice. I love the setting and I'm not too sure what it is. Like, it looks like a ton of GIFs, but I'm all here for it. I love how this version can stand completely separately from its future remake and still stand on its toes, with both having completely different yet really cool concepts. The jumps cause opportunity for fun disasters, and while it is lacking some hazards, it makes up for it with the gift boxes in the off-road. The gimmick here is that, you know, it's just chance, really. You know, you have to be precise because the gimmick is that there are speed boosts in the road and you get a cool risk versus reward. So if you're wondering what that is, it's just you could take the speed boost and skip some off-road, but there's a chance that if you're not precise, you hit this gift box. And I feel like that's a really cool concept because I myself found times where I was skipping some of the track, and at times found myself hitting these gift boxes because they were actually pretty large and they got in the way of my driving where I was headed. So I feel like it's got some cool gimmicks, and you know, I do wish there was some more hazards and stuff, but overall there's plenty here warranting an A tier. The next A tier track is Sky Garden. This one was tough not to put into S tier, seeing as it was one of my favorite tracks for a while. But Man, revisiting it, I gotta admit it's not as good as I remember. Don't get me wrong, this track is still great, it's A tier for a reason, but the lack of hazards is just very apparent on the track, and the layout and length is perfect, but I feel like it's easy to drive and it's missing something to add to its difficulty factor. Still, even with those issues, the uniqueness of this track is something that we really have never seen in Mario Kart before up to this point. You could argue other tracks, but most of those tracks released after. This was, you know, obviously Super Circuit was the third entry in the series, so even with some issues like that, I feel like this is a pretty good track. It's something that Super Circuit does better than any Mario Kart, and it's adding some cool and unique areas that you just wouldn't expect from what we had seen so far in the series, because it seemed like they had a formula of sorts, right? Even though it's flawed. You know, my slight bias for this track, because I grew up with it on DS, and that's an S tier track, that version. Sky Garden is still very good and slides perfectly into the A tier. Honestly, I was really surprised going into this one, but Boo Lake is headed into the A tier. I mean, I wasn't really expecting too much, but man did it deliver. After just starting the game, Boo Lake serves as the first truly difficult track and has the most unique presentation of any track so far. Being set on a pier off the distance of a mansion in the woods, almost immediately, I fell off this track. Again, and this happened time and time again, until finally I figured out how to maneuver past the bumps in the road much better. This track perfectly executes speed and has some pretty cool shortcuts I didn't even notice on my first playthrough, like that bridge one that is also on Broken Pier that we talked about earlier, which doesn't work half the time, but it worked once when I played this track. The boss fitting into the theme, or sorry, did I just say boss? Wow, I'm brain dead. The boos fitting into the theme makes me grin a little. I mean, they're holding little lanterns to light up the track. That's just so cool. And while I do wish they were hazards, it's fine, right? There's plenty going on here for me to fail, and it's early in the game, so I'll give it a pass. Overall, easy A tier.
Mega Lopunny. I actually like how this looks. I like that they made her look like a fighter. Although, did they give her tights with tears in them? S tier. I actually.
The Lightning Cup may be one of the best cups in any Mario Kart game, period. It's such a good time. To start off with Sunset Wilds, the lighting changes throughout the course. It's so pretty to look at. I mean, this isn't your average Desert 2, seeing as it takes place in a canyon, which we have not really seen before. The Shy Guy in a tent, they're perfect as obstacles, and I swear when you drive past them, even when I was younger I thought this, that they look like lobsters or like a Mr. Krabs knockoff. Only when you drive past them though. If you're like just looking at them on a PNG, they look normal. The track is fairly slippery with mud, and adding speed boost just adds to the difficulty perfectly, and it makes it hard to figure out where you need to go at times, right? Overall, it's a very fun and still difficult track, just an easy S tier. Bowser's Castle 4 is the next S tier. Alright, listen, Bowser's Castles in this game, they're fairly nice. They perfectly build off one another difficulty-wise and manage to be very good. Bowser's Castle 4 completes this pattern perfectly. Now, the atmosphere puts you inside of his castle and what appears to be a ticking time bomb with wires scattered all around. The track itself is good in length and has an easy and amazing layout. Just the right amount of hazards with the Mecha Koopas at the end in easy S tier. The Thwomps still offer that perfect risk versus reward like system that they offered before. The layout is much more difficult. I see myself having a much harder time than normal. It's perfect. This is the perfect Bowser's Castle. Alright, if you have played the remake on the Tour version has a remake, man, they need to bring that back in the next Mario Kart game because it is so good. Like, it is astronomically good, and it does this track such a like just service. It does it so well. Overall, easy S tier. This track is the next S tier. It's Lakeside Park, as you know, next S tier. Listen, this track honestly had me worried for a second there because I was going into the Special Cup And after, you know, the, I believe the Star Cup it was, I was a little worried. I didn't want to have a fumble at the beginning of a good, right after the tail end of a good time to start, just like Snowland again. But luckily, all my worries washed away when I saw Lakeside Park in that giant volcano. I mean, this track is everything Riverside wishes it was. The jungle atmosphere with a volcano in the back, just absolutely chef's kiss, man. Absolutely amazing. The rocks were great as hazards, the volcanic rocks that dropped down, and seeing the volcano erupt on the second lap with the lighting going down. What's not to like, man? What's not to like? There's plenty of opportunities for shortcuts or game-ruining moments with this track and all the jumps. And it's an amazing track. It's an easy S. I had a game-ruining moment and a shortcut. There's nothing to hate here. I mean, it just does the jungle aesthetic perfectly, and it feels so alive. And that's just something you can't say about many tracks in those early games, that it feels alive, a lot of them feel dull. But this track really just was booming. Easy S tier, man. Easy S. This one's gonna be really controversial, but honestly, I'm just gonna go for it because this is really just what I felt playing. Cheap Cheap Island, brother. Oh my god, that track was amazing. Had me preaching. I was not expecting this. Like, this track is just, listen, I know I shouldn't say this, but it's the U word, alright? It's on the screen. It's the U word, alright? First off, this track's aesthetic, it's so cool. You're on a beach with giant fish swarming around the surrounding ocean next to a light tower and a house off in the distance on an island while the sun is setting, and it looks so good for GBA standards, even for modern standards, really. I mean, other than the layout, the layout is absolutely amazing. The bridges are difficult to cross, and there's lots of them, and the hazards are just the cherry on top of this amazing track. The sandy beach sections themselves aren't too easy. You still have to watch out for the patches of grass that will inevitably slow you down. Hitting a crab hazard will spin you off into the water, and you'll likely have to get carried back by Lakitu. And also, this bird guy is looking pretty cool. He reminds me of the one from Yoshi's Island, so yeah, I feel like that makes it an easy S tier. But like, wow, I was not expecting that. That track was absolutely stunning. The next S tier belongs to Cheeseland, alright? What'd you expect? It was literally in the thumbnail. The Flower Cup goes back-to-back on banger tracks here, and Cheeseland is just a perfect track all around. To begin, it's like a desert-like atmosphere, but instead, it's filled with cheese everywhere, which is super cool. I mean, the track has hazards, which are mice. You get it? Because mice eat cheese? Oh. Either way, the atmosphere is perfect, and the track is still difficult. While I didn't run into any problems with the layout there, it's definitely an opportunity for your race to plummet if you fall in between on these little jumps on the track. The track is always, like, fairly tight, forcing you to have some more precise driving, and overall, man, everything with this track is pretty cool, and it's set at nighttime. That's pretty cool, and unlike somebody else, I'm not going to say that Mario Kart Stadium is the first Mario Kart track set at nighttime, because it's not. So, you know, pretty good. I'm going to give that an S tier. I mean, it's just amazing. And just like that, almost 30 minutes in, Rainbow Road is an S tier. Alright. This is the pinnacle of Mario Kart right here. This Rainbow Road perfectly embodies the identity of Super Circuit. It's a difficult and hard to understand game with obstacles at next to every corner, but once you really get used to what you're playing, it can be a janky yet fun experience with shortcuts to find everywhere and plenty of different ways to play. The Paper Mario reference in the background, the glistening moon shining among the clouds, the thunderous clouds waiting to hit you at the exact right moment, and the stars here to reward you for good timing, all with bounces all around, and for you to make up your own shortcuts. This game leaves it up to you. Sure, you can play it traditionally, or you can use all the bounce pads at your display to craft what is really your own Rainbow Road. A perfect and fitting ending to what I consider, wow, I just ruined a perfect segment. I was going deep cut there. But a perfect and fitting ending to what I consider a great Mario Kart. It could use a proper ending though.